Okay. As in with every Dharma talk, or Dharma action, or Dharma session, it's very, very important for us to train up our minds. Thanks. It's very, very important to train up our minds to create a positive motivation from the outset. If we create a positive motivation from the outset, our actions will be multiplied. If we create a positive motivation from the outset, our fruitioning of our actions will be much, much more. If we simply do an action and we don't create a higher motivation, a motivation to the level of a bodhisattva, not that we are a bodhisattva, but create a bodhisattva motivation, then it's very difficult that the action itself has great impact or has great effect. So what's important is the reason we need to make a motivation all the time, and if we find it difficult to make a motivation, that's the very reason we need to make a motivation, because it has to arise spontaneously. When a good motivation doesn't arise spontaneously, it shows us that our mind is preoccupied with a different type of habituation. So when our mind's occupied with a different type of habituation, it's very, very hard for us to make good motivation. So the mind has one space. Just for a rough example, that space can be occupied by A or B. A and B is very, very difficult. A or B. So therefore, A is good motivation, B is bad motivation. So therefore, what's important is we fill our space with A. How do we do that? When our space is usually filled with B through habituation, when we put A into it, good motivation, and we do it again and again and again, we consciously do it, we consciously focus on it, we consciously make it happen. Although in the beginning, it may seem superficial, but after a while, you will find that it becomes easier and easier and easier and easier. Whether it is superficial or not depends on the effort we put into it. How much we are able to do it, how much we're able to do practice, how much we're able to transform, how much we are able to bring benefit, how much we're able to embrace spiritual practice is dependent on how much we are ready to give up of our selfish mind. If our selfish mind is very strong, then it's very hard to give up. Why? Actions contrary to the Dharma, we don't need to label it positive or negative. Actions contrary to the Dharma is against universal truth. When it's against universal truth, there's no one punishing, or no one saying you're good, or no one saying you're bad, or no one putting you in a box, but you automatically create the type of action that create the same type of result. Remember, my favorite line is, action resembles the result. So therefore, if we do actions contrary to Dharma, if we speak contrary to Dharma, if we act contrary to Dharma, and when I say Dharma, it's different than in a monastery than here. Here, contrary to the Dharma takes a completely different meaning than in a monastery. Completely. Many great teachers in a monastery, the way they act in the monastery and the way they act outside of the monastery is very different. And the reason is simple. Very, very simple. If you live in a very cold climate, if you go to a warm climate, you're going to change your clothes. So they say, oh, why are you not consistent? Why are your clothes changing? Or why are your clothes different? Why is it not consistent? It's not that you're consistent or not consistent, it's the environment. So therefore, many teachers, when they leave the monastery, they're quite different. Even very conservative teachers in the monastery are very, very different when they leave the monastery. I saw that in the example of the Sultan Tsem Rinpoche, who is extremely conservative. Very, very, one of the most stalwart conservative lamas I've ever met. So therefore, it's not a contradiction, it's a skillful means. Skillful means. So therefore, how much we are willing to give up, and the word give up is very negative. The word give up is negative. Give up actually means you lose something. And when you say you lose something, it's also very negative, because losing something in English has a connotation of you have something and you don't have it anymore. So when we even use the wrong words, because we are attached to words, then we also get caught up in the words that we are attached to. Therefore, when we say give up, it's a very negative connotation. When we say renounce, it's a different connotation also. Actually, renounce means to give up. But to give up and renounce doesn't mean to give up happiness. It means to give up the methods that bring you to unhappiness. So if you're presented with the methods that give you happiness, and you say, oh, I can't accept it, or I can't do it, or I can't engage in it, actually you're not giving up. What happens is that the methods that we have are not methods that are inherently positive or inherently brings us to a happy state of mind. And hence, daily we feel happy, we feel unhappy, we feel disturbed, we feel not disturbed. And as time goes on, as sickness catches on, as age goes on, as our body starts to deteriorate, the unhappiness increases. It definitely increases. So what happens is, when we accept the Dharma path, we say renounce. Renounce actually refers to the methods that bring unhappiness to ourselves and the people around us. So if we say the word give up, if we say the word renounce, like here gave up is monk vows. If we say the word renounce or we say the word give up, it's actually to ordinary people, they'll think, oh yeah, I have to give up. I have to give up something. I have to give up something to gain something. I have to give up something to be spiritual. I have to give up something to adopt a path. That's wrong view. That's totally wrong view. Why is that wrong view? What we are not ready for is not Dharma, or giving up or not giving up. What we're not ready for is for our ego to be destroyed. As long as our ego is not destroyed, what is ego? There's many definitions, but let me give you a simple one. Simple definition of ego is the mind that cherishes oneself more than others. When the mind that cherishes oneself more than others, the ego is very strong. Every action that we do, we feed it. When we feed the ego, when we feed this mind through lack of awareness for others, through not carrying out responsibility, through not keeping promises, through not keeping commitments, or not putting in effort, or giving up in another sense, meaning not able to have patience enough to go through difficulties, that's giving up, that's a different type of giving up. When we do those actions, what happens is we can explain it away to the people around us and to our friends and all that, and they're probably at our level, so they accept and understand. But the truth of the matter is, we actually feed the ego even more. So when we feed the ego very much and more, the very actions, the very reason we cannot give up becomes the very reason for us to suffer even more. And create the karmic circumstances for other people around us to suffer even more. So therefore, that concept is not very hard to understand. It is not very hard to understand. It is something that we are not used to hearing. It's something we're not used to hearing. But when we hear it, whether we accept it at this moment or engage it at this moment or not, we remain. We remain and we listen and we contemplate and we think, because deep down inside, we feel that it resonates with something. We feel that it is true, that it does make sense. Because if I was to say to you something very negative, most people would get up and leave. But when we say things of this kind of nature to people, they don't get up and leave. They may or may not accept at that moment, but something inside resonates with them and say, wait, that makes sense. And that's what keeps us in the Dharma. That's what keeps us in spiritual practice. That's what keeps us in pushing ourselves towards spiritual practice. Because these words resonate. And it also matches what we have done with our lives. What we have done. Not being aware is a facet of the self-cherishing mind. People, whatever they do, if you think about it, whatever they do, the very basis of anyone doing any action, from going to the toilet, from taking a nap, from getting dressed, from going out, from conversations with associating with friends, whatever action that they do is to bring themselves some kind of happiness or some kind of relief. That is the ultimate motivation. From the smallest ant on the ground, who create anthills, to the supposedly the highest form of intelligence, ourselves. Every action we do, we don't need to think about it, we don't need to generate it. I want happiness for myself. I want something to myself. I want to gain something for myself. That is the basic, fundamental, automatic thought that we have. What happens is, if we meditate or if we focus and we think about that, it doesn't bring us happiness, what we've been doing. And we may call it diverse or different or hobbies or passions, or we can label it anything we want. It's just a label. Label means that it itself doesn't exist on its own from its own side. Exists from itself from its own side doesn't mean the action doesn't exist. It means the reason for the action and the result of the action doesn't exist. So therefore, that action is empty of existence. Please listen very carefully. When we want to steal from someone, the very motivation of stealing from someone is to gain some kind of happiness. But that stealing from someone is empty of existence. Why? It's empty of existence because the reason for it will not bear fruit. The very reason you engage in that action will not bear fruit. Meaning, to have peace, to have happiness, to have wealth, to have respect. So if we cannot get the result of that action, and we engage in that action, in Buddhism, on this level we call it empty of its existence. So please listen carefully. Empty of its existence doesn't mean that the action doesn't exist. It doesn't mean the person or the doer or the receiver or the recipient doesn't exist. It means that the motivation for the action and the reason for the action and the outcome, that's the secret. The outcome we want for the action is empty of existence. Why? Because when the method is incorrect, the result cannot arise.